And we're on. Fantastic. So I'll want to welcome you all to a webinar around context is key. Context is always important, not just in security, but it is usually important. Before we get started, I'd like to do a privacy disclaimer and says that in this quick announcement, it's regarding privacy and data protection, as this webinar may involve sharing of sensitive information. We kindly ask all participants to respect the confidentiality of the information presented. Please do not record, distribute, or utilize any part of this webinar without explicit permission from the organizers and presenters. With that behind us, I would like to really start focusing on the topic ahead and welcome you all to our webinar today. Context is key, empowering developers with the right security insight. My name is Boaz Barzel. I'm the field CTO at Ox Security. And I am, and you are, really fortunate to have exceptional panel of industry experts with us. You'll see that they'll bring their diverse perspective and they'll help us equip ourselves and yourselves with really meaningful insights. You'll learn from their experience, will drive a conversation that I believe will lead everyone to developing a safer software. And really, the first thing that I'd like to do is I'd like to introduce our panel. So let's do it one by one. I'll just go through my screen and Dragan, maybe you'll start.
Yes, thank you for inviting me to this webinar, and good afternoon or morning or evening to everyone who attends this webinar, depending on where people are connecting from. I'm founder and CEO of a startup called Glog.ai, working in software security space. At the same time, I'm senior director application security at IGT, multinational company. I'm also technology strategy advisor at CERN in Switzerland. Hope we will not produce a black hole. And I developed so far double-digit number of startups, some successful exits. I was on leading positions on global companies, C-level and similar levels. Also, I have a career in academia and industry as adjunct professor at university. Have authored or co-authored 10 books so far. Have 9 patents with USPTO so far, some of patent applications in progress. And I believe more than 100 scientific and technical papers at scientific journals and conferences, and also peer reviewer for scientific journals like Oxford, the Computer Journal, senior member in IEEE, ACM. And I think the most important, I used to initiate and lead hundreds of software and security projects in scientific world and also industry.
Oh, fantastic. Very good, Dragan. Thank you. Thank you very much. And let's continue with Kimberly. You're next.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kimberly. I currently head up application security and DevSecOps at Solaris, a leading banking as a service provider in Europe. My background bridges security and development, striving to always make security practical, scalable, and developer-friendly. I'm passionate about DevSecOps and its ability to transform security from a blocker into an enabler, embedding security seamlessly into engineering workflows without disrupting innovation. My passion for the subject also extends beyond my role, as I also lead the DevSecOn Cape Town chapter, where we build and foster community-driven security discussions. I'm super excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Fantastic. Thank you, Kimberly. Robert, to you.
Hi, everybody. I'm Robert Erenberg-Andersen. I am currently the founder and CEO of CrowsNest Systems, which is a security software provider focusing on governance, risk, and compliance automation. I am also the head of cloud security and DevSecOps at Danske Bank, the largest bank here in Denmark. Been in the security space a long time. It's really hard to follow profiles like Dragan's and Kimberly's, but I was the principal lead for security at Red Hat. Before that, I was the head of cloud security at AP Moller Maersk, and many years as a cyberwar specialist for the US military. I also run and maintain a number of open source security communities. I think I'll leave it there and pass it along.
Thank you very much, Robert. Uri, to you.
Sure. So I'm Uri Shamir. I work for a company called OpenText, Canadian company, Canadian-based, global one, 25,000 employees approximately, thousands of developers, and I'm a lead architect for the DevSecOps domain with over a decade of experience focusing on embedding security into the development lifecycle, empowering developers to do security as part of their development role, and of course seamlessly integrate various sets of tools in that domain into the CI/CD pipeline. You're on mute, boss.
Yeah, there was a noise coming behind me, so I muted. Thomas, you're next.
Hello, everyone. So my name is Thomas. I'm working as a senior director of security and privacy at Vinted. And Vinted is the largest second-hand fashion marketplace in Europe, more than 100 million of members, and is on a mission to make second-hand first choice worldwide. So I think it's a very beautiful mission where we are heading to. I joined Vinted 5 years ago, and I scaled security team from 0 to 100 now. So that was quite a journey for me and for the company also. Before Vinted, I was working as CISO in one of the biggest banks in Baltics. Currently working closely with management boards in the security field, and passionate about cycling. I can talk hours about that also. So thanks for having me.
That's very good. That's very good. We will be talking a lot. Cycling, maybe we can give some examples from cycling, but definitely. And really, when we're talking about the topic of context, sometimes we really feel like security is a game of, whack and maul. You just nailed one and 3 others pop up. It seems that it's not really getting any better, and sometimes worse, especially when it's production. It sometimes feels frustrating, it's exhausting, and in a lot of places feels really ineffective. And it's not really the developer's fault. True, the developers are the one that writing the code and creating the vulnerabilities, but it's not their fault. And really, where developers are really in the heart of innovation, and they're coding really, really fast. And sometimes it feels like those vulnerabilities are coming out of nowhere. There's a lot of noise. I don't know what's happening. All the issues looks the same. I need to start understanding, what's important for me. I'm drowning in tasks, and every once in a while I have to prioritize. So imagine if security wasn't really a blocker. It was an enabler. I know it's hard, but bear with me. Try to imagine that. By the end of this session, I hope you can. And really the vision of that is in the word today, what we want to do is we want to understand the context of everything. It's not very easy, but we're going to work now and talk about how we can explore that layers of context and understand the power that it has at allowing us to prioritize the developer's task and allow to prioritize the risk. We'll understand how it will actually bridge the teams together, so both security and development together. And by the end of this session, you'll have practical strategies and insights and advice on how to build security, not as a bottleneck, but as an enabler. In our agenda, we'll talk about the developer security disconnect. We're going to identify the gaps. We'll talk about context-driven insights and really the formula or secret sauce that each of our panelists will share with us. And eventually we'll understand and learn a little bit more about integrating security into the SDLC and developers workflow where it doesn't interrupt the basically doesn't interrupt the regular workflows and ensure that. So I'll start with you, Ori, and really talking about more how those most common frustrations of developers when they're facing the security requirements that are introduced into the workflows, which means that if you give example from your experience, eventually we see that developers focus a lot on coding. And when we try to add security into their workflows, it becomes difficult. So I'd like to understand what are the most common frustration and if you have any examples around it.
Sure. So, yeah, so of course, the frustrations would be generally first and foremost tied to time constraints, right? Like they have limited time, limited sizes of team. And also, if we talk generally very high level, it's the perception of the security being the bad guys, right? The security is a burden. But even when you get past that, and I think over the years we've seen security get more and more understandable by the dev teams. So you get past that with mature teams, still there are frustrations that are relevant and need to be to get attention. So beginning with the tools, so product security team issues a policy that requires everybody to run SAST and DAST scans. Okay, which tools are we allowed to use? Not all tools are good for everything, right? In a large organization such as OpenText, you have thousands of developers, many small companies that will acquire different technologies. You cannot just have one tool, choose one tool and gather all the findings and that's that. So mix of tools, and you have the customers requiring also doing some scans on their own. Maybe not all tools would be sufficient, and then the customers will find things that we did not. So next thing would be, then you have many tools, you have too many findings, right? The time constraint thing. We cannot address everything. Product security wants us to fix everything. The customer wants us to deliver clean code. It's impossible, right? Definitely with having so much information from all those tools. So too many findings, then the false positives. Of course, everybody are familiar with that big problem, very inherent to static code analysis, right? Where the context is missing, right? Moving on, can speak on and go on and on with that, right? And then it's not false positive, but what is critical, what is high, right? Again, another context thing, and I'm sure you'll talk about that, and the guys will mention from their experience, right? So how do we get to a common ground about deciding what is really critical for which application? Again, from my perspective, thousands of developers, hundreds of products. How can we arrange all of that and come to a common agreement as one PSEC team for all of that, right? And of course, lastly, maybe I can mention the last minute findings, right? So we passed all the cycle, coming close to the release gate. All of a sudden, the tools find new findings or a new CVE was published, right? What do we do now? Sometimes the tool just simply got rules update, or we upgrade the team. We cannot arrange upgrades only for specific teams. We upgrade in the center. Okay, just a taste of the complaints, right? I'm complaining about the complainers.
Yeah, of course. So we do hear a lot of complaints, and Kimberly, I want to learn a little bit more from your experience as well about kind of the examples that you have and the most common frustrations.
Yeah, sure. I think Yuri pretty much hit the nail on all of them that I hear a lot of. But if I could add, or just yeah, mainly also a lack of clarity on the policies that are provided by the tools, especially like the out-of-the-box ones, have vague policies sometimes, like don't use vulnerable dependencies without actionable guidance. And then as well, I'm an avid advocate of a redundancy, to make use of what you probably cannot see. Maybe another solution might show you a blind spot, but this can also contribute to confusion and frustration because multiple tools providing redundant or sometimes conflicting findings can frustrate the teams. Additionally, sometimes security processes probably aren't best aligned with agile methodologies. And this as well, if we are in an agile workplace, then also security should also be an advocate and supporting in agile, ensuring that, what any controls we put in our processes aren't actually blocking, like you shared earlier, but rather enabling the teams. And it isn't as impossible as Yuri did share. Yes, it's painful. It's a painful process. Much of arguing about it, but I think if you can share with your teams the vision, what you're working towards, and also leading with empathy and collaboration, choosing to work with the teams, involving developers in the tool selection and the design processes, you'll find that they're much more willing to help you. People feel more willing to support when they feel involved in the decision-making process. And then also it's important to differentiate between a must-fix issue and a nice-to-fix issue. We need to, again, collaborate with the teams and lead with empathy, ensuring that, working with them and finding out where's the middle ground that we can work on. I need you to fix this, and this critical vulnerability. You need to release in 2 weeks. Where can we meet each other? How can I help you? How can you help me? And yeah, training and enablement, of course, that's very important to equip developers with the skills to understand and resolve these vulnerabilities themselves, shifting the onus of security remediation from your security teams to the developers themselves. Yeah.
That's very good. It's a great point, specifically around the training and enablement. I think that's really relating to the fact that sometimes the security and the development teams, they want to work fast, they want to be successful, they just don't understand each other really. And each of them has their separate KPIs, separate goals. And I understand that this is an important thing. And maybe, Robert, I would like you to comment also on kind of the cultural, I would say, issue versus tooling problem versus it's actually both in that sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm glad you picked me for this one because I have strong opinions. I always like to say, and maybe this is an unpopular statement, I don't care about tools, right? Tools are a mechanism for accomplishing an outcome. So in that context, I care that we have a mechanism, but what they are is kind of irrelevant, right? So from a cultural perspective, and this is really where I see DevSecOps as a concept breakdown, there's really three players. You have developers and kind of the DevOps function, which is a methodology change for most organizations. But when you add security in, it is a cultural change. And then you have the business priority, right, which creates a dichotomy between the two. You mentioned these different KPIs. These teams are not incentivized historically to kind of operate the same way. And so that leads to a friction, right? And so one of the kind of main components I like to talk about in this context and try to reduce that friction is, teaching people. Kimberly mentioned empathy, right? Understanding the prioritizations of other teams outside of my own context and kind of getting into their headspace, walking a mile in their shoes. I think that's really, really kind of quintessentially important, right? One of the things that I see breakdown for a lot of organizations is, you have a security team, right, which is focused very, very heavily on, protecting an organization, right? And very, very prioritized and incentivized to reduce risk meaningfully for a business within the context of that financial use case, right? And you have a developer team, which is kind of told, get this thing out the door for me right now and start making me some money, right, between the lines. Those two functions can't be married if those are the prioritizations that are kind of coming down the pipeline from a leadership perspective. So the most important place to start making an empathetic change is actually not with the security component or the developer component, but with your organizational prioritization and leadership. And I think that's a harder needle to move, but it's one that kind of has to be brought to the forefront when you're having this discussion in your organization.
Those are really, really good points. Thomas, I'd like to hear what you're thinking about that as well.
Thank you both. And I think you correctly mentioned at the very beginning time pressure. The teams are under big time pressure to deliver their result. And so let's put it into the context. The time pressure is big. The landscape of vulnerabilities and threats is changing super fast. So what else then we can do to respond to this situation? So first of all, we could implement administrative controls, like provide policies, some kind of a guidance. This doesn't work. The landscape just changes so frequently. To put something additional on the shoulders of developers, it just doesn't work.
Mm-hmm.
The tooling needs to be integrated. Policies needs to be as a code. It needs to be user-friendly, shifted to the left as soon as possible, because if it is in the latest stage of software development lifecycle, it becomes truly complex to fix the things ineffective. Some of you already mentioned cultural changes. The teams are somehow siloed, both production teams and security and development teams. So prioritization conflicts are just like inevitable in those cases. So there are ways to address those gaps. First of all, just for security teams, stepping into developer shoes and creating and implementing developer-friendly tools, first of all. Understanding that only with the tools we can solve those problems, only helping them by design, incorporated in the pipeline, and fostering a collaborative culture. Because eventually incidents will happen, those things will pop up, and we need to know about them as a security team to be able to react and implement changes as we need to go. So we cannot be as a policymakers, as a policemen in the company. We need to be as close as possible to the developers' real work and real environment.
Yeah, this is a really good point because it requires security to shift their mind. They're changing and saying, okay, what I was doing in later stages or in production where it's easier for me, now I need to do it together with the developer. It's basically like, the developer is coding. Once they finish coding and they're trying to push the code, the security person will have to say, listen, it's great. Just fix me here and there because this will be critical later on in the production stage. And I'm okay with it. But right now we're seeing that this is not the case. And I'd like to listen to Dragan. And Dragan, can you also provide me some aspects of where poor communications of really the security created those kind of challenges for the development team? If you have examples on how you resolved it as well.
So yes, there are many of examples on that. One thing is that in some companies, or maybe most of companies, security team is perceived as some kind of policing people. So as someone mentioned, we need to be allies, not someone who will catching the mistakes of developers. That's one thing. Another thing is security starts from the very beginning. That means when you in inception phase of new product, new application, new features of existing product, we need to engage as early in process as possible to put security requirements, not just functional requirements, but security requirements. If you miss that communication point, then later on you will be in a big problem. So that's another thing which some companies miss. And next thing is tooling, process and tooling. Unfortunately, I have to say I tried most of SAS tools, static application security testing tools on the market at the moment. Some leaders on Gartner, Magic Quadrant, Forrester Wave, all of them, literally all of them, have similar problems. That's a bunch of false positives. That goes over the 90% sometimes. And you come to developers and tell them to fix that. And they analyze that and they tell you, I have these 2,000 findings. Out of them, 15 to 1,800 are false positives. We spent months in vain. And they get kind of angry. And it creates friction with the teams, business teams, financial teams who want to get something out of the door and to get money for your product and time to market. And they create marketing, maybe created cool, fancy marketing campaign, and all goes wrong. Another thing, so we need better tools in SaaS area and SEA area. And when you trash out, filter out false positives, you need them to remediate the real security vulnerabilities, something what really matters, which in that context, business context, create problems. And how to fix that, how to remediate. I'm sorry to say that I worked with many companies, many teams, even senior developers, but usually mid-year or junior, don't know how to fix simple OWASP top 10 things, not just very sophisticated issues. So we need to remediate it. And that's actually why I, with my team, created a startup called Glog.ai. Solely function was to filter false positives from the reports of current SAST engines. That's one thing. And to give very precise, context-specific remediation advice on level of lines of code and tell developers these 20 lines of code can be attacked in production in this way. This is attack vector which can exploit. So to prevent developers telling something is false positive, it's really is not real false positive, but real vulnerability. And tell them you need to fix this exactly this way. And it works like remediation advice, or even more, automatically can fix the code instead of developers. So it's enormously speed up the process, and there is no friction anymore after that. Issue with this, or challenge with this, is developers don't usually trust the tool, AI tool, because it can hallucinate. So there is need to verify that fix from human. But even verifying fix by human is much, much faster than doing that by hand review and hand verification. Plus, to achieve this, we employed threat modeling. I believe that very few companies on the market do proper threat modeling after security requirements and defining security architecture. And we can gather a lot of information from source code and from the threat model, which SaaS tools don't recognize. And even more, we went one step further and getting feedback from DAST, the Dynamic Application Security Testing, or IAST, Interactive Application Security Testing, and for observing production and penetration test in RASP, Runtime Application Security Protection. And getting that back and correlating them with findings in early phase, we can improve process greatly. So one solution is you cannot teach all the developer on walls to understand security. I think very few universities do that. So what I worked in university, I know I created some trainings for software security. And maybe with the right balance between tooling and processes and education, we can help. We had experience with Glog that people make same mistake 3 times, 4 times, 5 times, and they eventually learn. So there is no SQL injection or common prompt injection or cross-site scripting anymore in that code. Why? Because these people, when Glog tells them, you can fix this on this in this way, they eventually learn how to fix that and how to do proper coding. So that's one of solutions.
Yeah, that's very good and very, very interesting. And it started to remind me of an experiment that was done with people when they're doing a certain action and they're getting electrified. So we haven't had that, putting developers like electrifications when they're pushing code that's vulnerable, they get a zap, and they'll stop doing that eventually. But we haven't invented that. But this is a really important information you shared, because what you've just shared with us is, I would say, the basis of understanding a context. And I think that one part of the lack of context is up until now, we talked about tools that were doing one thing and we're looking at very specific elements. And once you're starting to expand that view, for example, you mentioned human in the loop. When a human in the loop, it's hard to integrate human into the process because the process is really fast and we don't have enough humans. But then when you have the tools that allow us to see everything, let's say across the pipeline, and start gathering information from multiple points, I think the context becomes a bit clearer. And in that essence, Kimberly, I want to listen from you. Why do you think that context is missing ingredient in so many tools? And if you have examples of how it impacted or if it impacted kind of the security response.
Yeah, sure. I have an example. From my experience, the problem with contextless alerts, are that many of the solutions that we have in our pipelines actually flood developers with vulnerabilities and misconfigurations without actually prioritizing their relevance to the application's environment. An example could be like a critical CVE that affects a library that is not used in production. And this might distract teams from addressing a truly exploitable vulnerability. We had leveraged a CSPM that flagged several high-risk vulnerabilities in container images. However, without the context, like without checking whether the vulnerable function was actually being called or if compensating controls existed. So this was escalated as a risk, and developers spent weeks patching now a low impact issue, and they could have shifted their focus to critical feature rollouts. So by integrating contextual insights, like taking into account usage analysis and runtime impact, you can shift the focus to vulnerabilities that pose genuine risks and actually reduce remediation time. So context actually helps us by prioritizing our vulnerabilities based on actual exploitability, and allows the teams to focus on what's important and what is actionable, rather than wasting time on the noise from all these solutions. Thank you.
Thank you. And Thomas, so how can security and development team determine what's really critical? We heard from Kimberly, we had from Dragan. I want to know your thoughts about it, and how can you just even find something that's urgent and not just critical, if it makes sense?
Yeah, totally. So it all starts with the culture in the company, I would say. There needs to be a culture that if there is a vulnerability, there need to be a process set up. There needs to be a kind of mental understanding in place that we need to fix it if it is urgent. Not to postpone it, not to leave to next iteration or etc., but we need to fix it right now because quality matters.
Yeah.
When this culture is in place and we can rely on it, the first thing that we need to do is to assess potential impact. And Kimberly already gave some good examples how this can be done. And assessing, but like the whole chain unlocks here, because assessing the impact, first of all, you need to understand what critical assets do you have, what is important for business, how it will affect business. So this means you need to closely collaborate with the product people, business people, sales, whatever is the market that you are dealing in. And you need to have that understanding, which is not by design or by default in place. Critical assets, yeah, one thing, but to know what are the critical assets, you need to have assets inventories as such in place. So a lot of things needs to be set up for a developer's success to make a informative decision whether it is impactful or not. So hopefully security teams can help set up that process and do the thinking behind the scenes so that when it happens, you don't need to put all that effort clarifying all those things in the value chain. You just execute it in a day, in a week, in a month, whatever is most appropriate to the business. There are then other steps like evaluating the exploitability. It can also change in a day, in a two. We have seen those examples in the market.
Yeah, that's very good. That's actually a very interesting part because as we're digging deeper, what I'm seeing is that there's not just one part of context. Context is not just a singular thing that you have to have. It's basically a lot of different, I would say, data points that, you know, as you said, Thomas, comes from your assets, Kimberly, from the different tools that are now starting to talk to each other, but it still feels a bit, you know, that a human needs to be there and sits down and kind of collect that information and connects to it. And I want to understand, Uri, from you, if there's any kind of process or workflows that worked effectively for you and were able to surface different types of insights around the context and really what made them stand out.
Right. So, yeah. So again, if we're talking about, as the guys mentioned here, talking about essentially doing risk-based analysis, right? So the key point here is how can we get into agreement between security and developers about how to calculate that risk, right? There has to be some way of standardizing that. And this is something that we have tried and works pretty good. Like if you have some kind of an agreed calculator with where you select the various components or address the various parts of the what will become a risk in the end, right? As some of the components were mentioned here, like is there web access at all, right? Is there sensitive data in the application? If you can collect that metadata in the beginning or add that metadata to the application, categorize your application or even the sub-modules with that information, and you have a calculator that is agreed, and you're just not just looking at the severity that was spit out by the scanner, right? Or a CVSS score, a naive one, right? You want to add those components. If you collect that information and have that attached to the application or even component that you're scanning, you have that metadata, then you could even enhance and calculate the risk in advance, right? And allow in maybe relaxing severity and then point out or at least surface to the top the ones that you want the guys to address immediately, right? Or far to the left of the supply chain. Begin with them, right? Don't just bombard them with everything, but at least surface those first. So these are things that we tried and they work, and we have that working as part of the tool. So we scan automatically, of course, as part of the CI/CD with SAST and DAST, but all the information that is being collected then, we apply that information on top. Of course, other mechanisms also exist, kind of things that Dragan mentioned, right? Of course, they apply AI where possible, and nowadays also beginning to, of course, put LLM into the picture. We didn't say Gen AI, and it's 38 minutes already into the. We should have said that many more times, right? So
I tried to avoid it.
yeah. So,
but we'll talk
actually,
about it.
Dragan mentioned it, I think. No, Dragan did. Yeah.
So Dragan mentioned it. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
good. And I'd like to continue that, you know, line of thought that you created right now, Uri, in basically understanding the not just the process, but Dragan, I'll ask you, what are the critical points in the software development lifecycle where those security insights should be integrated? And if you can give a few examples, you know, like you did before around it.
One important thing here, I think that we have a software security assurance program usually in companies. It's usually called that way, SSA, and also SDLC, Software Development Lifecycle. And some companies have so-called gatekeepers or sign-offs at different phases. Usually, in my practice, these things don't, don't work well because business risk is actually business thing, not security thing. Business security team presents risk level to business team, and it's up to them to tell, we will accept that risk or we will not. We just tell them some measurement of risk. And integrating security process into SDLC means that you will work with software architects, even with business analysts at beginning, if they insert new product, and with security architects and with software developers, they will development lead teams, then with the QA, with delivery teams, as well as with support maintenance. So according to that, these are a couple of points where we can put these measures. And one important thing is definition of secure product is not same for everyone. So I worked with government institution, with finance institution, with services, technology companies, and they perceive security in different ways. So someone mentioned policy as code. I think Thomas mentioned that. So we need to apply security which will be sensitive to what is security policy. My company works for government lotteries. Their view of security is pretty much different of, let's say, retail business. Why? Because it's huge money in jackpots in states. So I believe that principle that we developed in globe.ai, extend to left instead shift to left. Because if you shift to left, then right side is uncovered. Actually, you need to cover everything from the right to left to the right side, from the inception to the production, and then to return back. So points where it should be integrated in security requirements, threat modeling, all process data flow source security boundaries, in software development, in testing, in pre-release phase, and then in production, and support and maintenance, and feedback what you learn from real environment, and how dangerous something what you see in real environment, tell back to security architects and tell them, you need to make this thing much stronger, much bigger security. So that's some points, touch points between software security assurance program in company and SDLC, software development lifecycle. I think there are 6 to 8, maybe even more touch points to implement. And these touch points are not sign-offs, not gatekeepers. Business will not allow you to tell them, I prevent this to be released in field. Why? They need to calculate risk. Sometimes they will put risky product on market because it's calculated and accepted risk. Depends on risk appetite.
Yeah, that's a very good point. In two different aspects. The first aspect is really the risk appetite is different. Also, the attack surface of a company and the attack landscape versus that company and the different markets, they're all different. And also the different types of attacks and languages and packages. There's so much diversity between different companies. That's a very, very good point. And I like your note here around not creating gatekeeper, but evaluating risk across the SDLC. So every step of the way, we understand if the risk is acceptable or not acceptable and what kind of risk is acceptable. But then we talk about,
Boaz, if you allow me to tell one more thing,
Yeah,
I think
of
very
course.
important, but it will be very short. Gen AI tools are used very broadly in some companies today. I just wanted to warn attendees and also colleagues here. Gen AI tools create very unsecure code. Some research shows 40 to 45% of software code created by Gen AI tools is vulnerable. So more than code that security, that development teams, regular development team does. It lies in situation what is code that these tools learn from, and they learn from, I would say, bad teachers.
Yes. So it's the same, I would say 15, 20 years ago. I'd say 15 years ago. 15 years ago, we would talk about copy paste from Stack Overflow, and You all know what it means. So now when we talk about Gen AI, it's the quantity of the code increases because, you know, AI writes faster than a human, but the quality of the code is still copy paste from Stack Overflow. Well, I love Stack Overflow, but you know, they're not focused on security over there. And what I wanted to say here is that there's actually a role for leadership to enable us to create that culture, which you already talked about. So, Robert, I'll ask you, you know, what role does the leadership have in that kind of ability to create the shared responsibility? Because we already spoke about culture. We talked about, you know, this needs to be shared. So what is the leadership role and how can I affect the leadership in order to help me create that kind of culture?
It's a great question, and there's really two kind of components to the answer. So the first one is around what can leadership do for us, right? And I always like to say one of the best pieces of advice I got early in my career when I was in the military from a leader I respected was leadership is not a throne you sit on and point out from. Leadership is a block you put your head on waiting for the guillotine to come down, right? So a really effective leader will take ownership of outcomes, right? And give a clear path towards an achievable outcome to their team. So one of the worst things I see organizations do, and especially with leaders who, let's be very frank, don't always have a deep understanding of what they own, they will set unrealistic goals for their teams. They will set unachievable outcomes. And then when it doesn't work, they'll blame the team, right? Measurable steps to success are really, really critically important. On the other hand, you know, in terms of what can we do to influence leadership, I think generating an understanding and learning to speak the language of the people we're talking to is really important. So I often say, and you know, security is not a thing, right? It's not. It's a property of something else, right? And if I want to create the property of security in anything, whether that's infrastructure or data or code or people or buildings, I need to understand three things. Number one, I need to understand the risk profile in which I'm operating in. What is tolerable to us and what is not tolerable to us? I need to understand how the thing works. Like, what is it supposed to do? What is it not supposed to do? And what could it do if we manipulated it? And finally, how and why do bad guys interact with that thing, right? So I try to find common language that people can understand. So a metaphor I'm fond of is I talk about houses, because everyone here lives in a house or an apartment or a houseboat or some type of domicile that they sleep under, right? And so when you leave your house in the morning, you've pretty reasonably, you know, are sure that you've secured your home because you know how to secure a home. You've put a lock on the door. Maybe you have a heavy door depending on your risk profile. Maybe there's bars on your windows or a camera or a dog or whatever. And you know this because you know how houses work, how to get in and out of them and where things are kept in houses. And you know how and why people break into houses. It's the same thing when we talk about our IT systems, right? It's not different. It's not special. It's just a different system and a different motivation and methodology of the attacker, right? If you can find a way to translate that like deep technical knowledge that most of us, you know, hopefully have into a language framework that decision makers can understand and vice versa, can I translate my business case to a language an engineer understands? We can start to create that, you know, what we talked about earlier, that concept of empathy, and understand that there's an outcome we are all trying to achieve through different lenses.
Yeah, it's a very nice point because when you started talking about we understand how our houses work and how attackers work, we basically start to think, okay, they can break through the door, they can come in from the window. I have a safe, you know, is the safe connected to the wall or not? And can they blow it up or whatever? I feel that sometimes everyone doesn't really understand everything in an organization. And eventually, if I'm using your metaphor, we don't really understand the house. There's too many rooms, too many windows, too many things that I don't know that even exist in the house. You know, sometimes I'll have a hole dig down because, you know, someone forgot a hole and someone else discovered the exit and followed the hole until into my house and I didn't know about it. So I'm trying to think about backdoor in houses. So it really is interesting. And what I'd really want to do right now, because we're coming to really the end, I want each and every one of you to share your best practice, your insight, and what our audience can do right now, okay, or take with them from your experience that will give them the ability to create better context and kind of create that shared language, as you're saying, build that culture that you talked about, and kind of being able to put tools with more context in it. I'll start with you, Thomas.
Yes, so addressing this message to the leadership of the organizations, it's important to set the tone and kind of what you talk about, this gets done. So there are operational meetings, performance meetings that you look into, the dashboards, availability, whatever else is important for your business, for your technological stack. Talk about vulnerabilities. Ask for it. Deep dive into it. Understand what's behind. And all this will show the culture, the empathy, the understanding for the security teams, for the developer teams. It will lead by example. It will be easier to understand and eventually provide the needed resources, whether it is training, tooling, whatever helps in that case. So if it is not talked about from the top, from the leadership, it's hard to expect something to be done in this area.
Yeah, that's very good. That's number one. Uri, number two.
So I think I can refer back to the calculator, the risk calculator that I mentioned, and basing that on metadata that you will collect and keep down to the model or module that you're scanning, right? You have a repository that's really pretty much usually maps to a module, right? And you're scanning that. If you have the relevant metadata already there, like what is this module responsible for? Is it accessible to the web? Does it touch or does it pass through sensitive data? Things along that line. If you collect that metadata, define the structure for it, collect it, and then apply it. When you calculate the risks, then you immediately can wave off a lot of the things and get a strong focus already shifted left, okay, from the early days of coding.
That's fantastic. That's a good idea. I also think that, as you're building that calculator, you don't have to have everything from the get-go. You can start adding different points as we're going along and kind of think of that methodology. It's a very good idea. Kimberly, what's your best practice?
Yes, I agree 1,000%. I was going to say that as well. Someone shared earlier, I can't remember who, so I don't want to lie, but someone shared that developers are incentivized to ship fast, right? And we need to keep this in mind as the security team. So adding security too early on without the clear benefits often feels like a burden to them. And if we put ourselves in their shoes, we can see why, right? They don't have the knowledge or our insight on these issues. So we should actually integrate incrementally, like how you shared now, introducing lightweight security checks at the earliest stages, such as PRs for secret scanning, for example, and then gradually add more comprehensive tests as your teams gain maturity. And then, of course, provide feedback early and often. So shorten that feedback loop by surfacing security issues in the IDEs directly, if you can get that going right. I'm still trying, but yes, or in pull requests even. And automation, let's make use of automation by automating the mundane tasks while reserving the manual reviews for us, the complex issues for our teams. And yeah, always lead with empathy and try to make your development teams your ally and let them also know that you're working with them towards a common vision that you both share. So yeah.
That's very good. And really, I love the shorten the feedback loop. I think this is really important right now because, some of the feedback that I hear is that, why have you come so late in the process? We've already, built that code 2 weeks ago. What took you so long? So I think this is a really nice point. And also what you shared on kind of the PR. ID is very tough. I don't know a developer who volunteers to install an IDE for security just because. But definitely in the PR or where you have more context, it makes sense. Dragan, there's also a question I see in the Q&A that I'd like you to answer with your best practice. And really, would it be possible for you to give an example of a time when seamless integration of security into the SDLC actually delivered measurable results?
Yes, I can share one test that we had with our blog.ai. One of SaaS tool providers gave us findings of some famous open source things. And they had like 12,500 vulnerabilities found. We were scared of that. And we immediately told it's something what is impossible. And we, after some analysis with automation tools, found that actually less than 50 are real vulnerabilities. So let's say numbers, 12,500, 2 hours to 4 hours per finding to analyze. It's 25, minimum 25,000 hours. It's close to 14 many years. We did that in 4 main days with implementation of this tooling, and which was supported by human in the loop, as I mentioned. But that's really significant speed up, and that's our numbers. On another question, concept of security champions in development teams. That are people, members of development teams, which have passion towards software security. They are point of contact of us from security, of application software security, to talk to development. In big organization with thousands of developers, you cannot know all the products, all the technologies, everything. Usually, application security teams are small. So you rely on these people. You give them objectives. You need to kind of give them some benefits, make them annual or whatever goals, and you need to kind of incentivize them for doing that work. So security champions, members of development teams with passion to software security. Second thing, start early with security and cover entire process from the left to right. Not just one thing or two things. Third thing, automate as much as possible, because automation helps you to speed up. You cannot automate everything, but you can automate, especially if you're a big organization, a lot of things. It will help you. And if you allow me, I have an invitation call for action here. I'm member of IEEE, you know probably about IEEE and ACM. IEEE standardization group, working group, which we do standardization for large language models, agents, and evaluation of tools. My team is creating large language models for specific programming languages. If someone from here of attendees or panelists is happy to join us and help us to create LLMs for different programming languages, which will be trusted and ethical and precise, we will talk to you. So there will be much better security if we have much better LLMs. And my team started to work on that. It's huge work. It's not like OpenAI, generative AI. It's discriminative AI, as you can, different kind. It's not all these things that you copilot and everything. It's a little bit different.
Exactly. That's a very good, very good feedback. I like the security champion part really much. I think that a lot of organizations are going in that direction. The final best practice, Robert.
Save the worst for last. So yeah, so I think, you know, we mentioned before that you know, I'll say it like this. I'm at my heart, I'm an engineer, right? And what engineers do is solve problems. And so when I approach a problem in an organization, and especially the problems that create that friction we talked about before between developer teams, security teams, operations teams, I try to start by saying, what would a successful solution to this problem look like to me? What would achieve my aims and my goals in this? And then I stop and go, what about the other party? Right? What would they care about? What would be a meaningful solution for them? And I look where I can make deltas between the two, right? Maybe it's not 100%, but if there's overlap between our success criteria, let's focus on those pieces first. And let's not let perfection be the enemy of good, right? So when I look at security, we look at the principles of target hardening. There's no perfect security. A motivated enough attacker with enough resources and enough time, they're probably going to get in, right? So how do I make sure that I am building up our security to a meaningful and a sufficient level for my needs and our organizational needs? And that changes, to Dragan's point earlier, based on our industry vertical or risk profile or what have you. So I would say very simply, what does the best outcome for the most people look like? Try to focus on that.
Fantastic. That's a really good feedback, and always think on all parties, I think, and kind of leads to what we were talking previously on kind of the shared responsibility, shared KPIs. So with that, we came to the hour. I'd like to thank everyone, especially our panelists. This was amazing, very insightful. There was a lot of good content, a lot of experience that personally I was able to take very good points. I also want to thank our audience, and I hope that everything that we have shared here before, you are able to take at least one point that will help you in your daily or strategic endeavors. If you have more questions, you want to have more conversation, feel free to join us for our next webinar. Our panelists will probably answer you if you'll ask them. So I'd like to thank you all. Thank you very much for our panelists. Feel free to follow us on LinkedIn for more webinars and updates. And thank you, and let's rock. Bye-bye.
Good weekend. Bye-bye, guys.
Bye.